What's going on, guys? Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'll be going through every NBA team and deciding if they're winners or losers this offseason. The last video was for the Eastern Conference, so if you haven't watched that video yet, go do it after this one. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. This video will be about the Western Conference teams. The first team up is the Los Angeles Clippers, and they're winners for this season, but definitely not for their future. Their offseason started at the draft, where they took Yannick Niederhauser with the 30th pick, and they traded the 51st pick to the Knicks for the 50th pick, where they took Kobe Sanders. I thought the pick of Conan Niederhauser was a little bit of a reach, but he does project as a good defensive center with his size, but doesn't have much of an offensive game yet. And Kobe Sanders can be a solid facilitator at the NBA level, and he has a lot of size, standing at 6'7" as a point guard. What they did in the draft is not the reason why they're winning so. Starting in free agency, on the first day, they agreed to contract extensions of James Harden and Nicholas Batum. I'm a real fan of both these extensions. James Harden agreed on a super team-friendly deal compared to the production he still gives at the age of 35. And Nicholas Batum showed he can still be a rotational player, even at his age of 36. It didn't take them long into free agency to add another piece to the super old team, where they signed Brook Lopez to be a backup center for Ivica Zubac. A couple of days later, they made a quiet but secretly good trade, where they sent Norman Powell, who's on an expiring contract, to the Miami Heat in exchange for John Collins from the Utah Jazz. A few weeks later, Bradley Beal gets bought out by the Phoenix Suns, so the Clippers sign him to a 2-year deal worth $11 million a season. The reason the Clippers got him for so cheap is because Phoenix is paying him roughly $19 million a season over the next 5 years in dead cap. Getting someone of his caliber who was capable of giving you 30 on any given night for so cheap is a big reason why they're winners. And their last move they made so far was bringing back a legend of the team, Chris Paul, to be a backup point guard to James Harden. They haven't lost anyone detrimental to the team's success other than Norman Powell, but they got a very solid big in return for him. Guys like Amir Coffey and Ben Simmons are both still free agents, so it will be interesting to see what happens to them, whether the Clippers bring them back or not. But it's reported the Celtics and Knicks are both interested in Simmons. Moving on to the Memphis Grizzlies, and they are losers. They're not in a rebuild, but they traded away their third best player for pretty much nothing that can help them win now. I know they got 5 first-round picks, but what are they going to do with those picks? They'll more than likely be very late picks, so how are you going to benefit from late first-rounders? Unless they use those picks to trade for a secondary offensive star, I don't think they'll be a contender, especially in a stacked Western Conference. I don't think Jaren Jackson Jr. is a good enough or consistent enough secondary scorer on a contender. Their draft was pretty questionable too. They traded up for the 11th pick, which turned into Cedric Coward, who probably would have been available with their original pick at 16. They traded one of the Magic's picks in 2028, 2 second-rounders and a 16th pick to acquire Coward. They also had the 48th pick in the draft where they took Javon Small. Cedric Coward is an exceptional three-point shooter that plays very solid defense up against 2s, 3s, and some 4s. But with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, G.G. Jackson, Jalen Wells, Santi Aldama, and Vince Williams Jr., all on the roster, who play very similar roles, the pick doesn't make the most sense. Moving on to free agency, they had a secretly good period where they signed Ty Jerome on a severely low contract for what he's worth. He signed a 3-year deal worth an average of $9 million a season. At the very beginning of free agency, they agreed on contract extensions with Jaren Jackson Jr., Santi Aldama, and Cam Spencer. Jaren signed a massive 5-year extension worth an average of $51 million a season, with a player option in the last year. That is definitely an overpay, but a guy with whose two-way ability is hard to find, so you have to do everything you can to keep players like that. Aldama signed a 3-year deal worth an average of $17 million a season. I like this re-signing also. Aldama is a player every contender needs. He's a great shooter beyond the 3-point line and can handle the ball, but he isn't the greatest defender on the perimeter. They traded Jay Huff to the Pacers for 2 second-round picks. They then replaced Huff with Jock Landale, but they've already got Brandon Clark as a backup center, so I guess you can never have too many centers on your roster. They lost Luke Kennard, but they already have a bunch of 3-point shooters, so I guess it really isn't that big of a loss, and Ty Jerome can be his replacement. The next team up is the Utah Jazz, and they are losers. Things looked really promising for Jazz fans coming into the offseason, with guys like Lauri Markkanen, Colin Sexton, John Collins, and Jordan Clarkson all being on the market, and even Walker Kessler, if the right trade came up. They did trade away some of those guys, but they got back pretty much nothing in return. But starting at the draft, where they had the 5th pick, and they took a shot at a guy that said he didn't want to be drafted by them, Ace Bailey. They also traded up from the 21st pick to the 18th pick, where they selected Walter Clayton. Ace Bailey has tremendous upside as a scorer and finisher around the rim, but he has some work to do on his isolation defense and decision-making. But his size can be a plus on the defensive end. Walter Clayton also has some upside on the offensive end with his ability to knock down shots, especially from beyond the 3-point line. Moving on to the moves they made. The first one I'm going to talk about is where they sent John Collins to the Los Angeles Clippers in exchange for Kevin Love, Kyle Anderson, and a singular second-round pick in 2027. If they traded Collins at the deadline, they would have got way more back from him. I'm sure there were better offers on the table for Collins. Kevin Love will be bought out, so they will lose him for nothing. Kyle Anderson joins a bunch of forwards on the Jazz roster, and a second-rounder is whatever. They then traded Colin Sexton and a second-rounder of their own to the Charlotte Hornets for Yusuf Nurkic. Again, another trade that made absolutely no sense. You're telling me a team like the Rockets, Magic, Warriors, Clippers, Grizzlies, Wolves, or even the Thunder, teams that needed a guy that could improve their offense while being a menace on the defensive end, couldn't have given up more than Nurkic. Maybe not a first-round pick or a young player, but I'm sure they could have gotten a second-rounder of 2. They also released Jordan Clarkson. This makes more sense considering the age of Clarkson, but the other 2 trades are unacceptable. I guess they just wanted to free up minutes for the young players, but they could have got draft capital in return. And why not move on from Markkanen as well? A minor move they just made was where they sent RJ Lewis to the Celtics for Georges Niang and 2 second-round picks. Lewis was an undrafted free agent from this year's draft, so the fact they got more for him than they did Sexton and Collins is crazy. I wouldn't be surprised if Niang gets bought out or traded again, but the fact it's a reunion makes me believe he'll be on the roster for the time being. The next team up is the Sacramento Kings, and they're losers this offseason. Yet again, they fail to pick a direction they want to go in. It's clear to everyone, except this front office apparently, that this team isn't close to competing for a championship. If you're happy being in purgatory, where you're not good enough to compete for a championship, and you're too good to have a real solid chance at getting a top pick, then this is the perfect offseason for you. Moving on to the moves they've made. Their offseason started at the draft, where they traded a top 16 projected first-round pick to the Thunder for the 24th pick, where they selected Nick Clifford. They also had the 42nd pick, where they selected Maxime Reynard. Both have looked really solid to start their pro career in the Summer League. Clifford is a winning player that isn't great at a specific role, but does everything you need a player to do. Reynard can be a pretty good role player, but will struggle with consistency. He can be like what Quinton Post was last season, playstyle-wise. But moving past the draft and onto free agency, where they signed Dennis Schroeder to a 3-year deal where he'll be making about $14 million a season. I'm personally a bigger fan than a lot of people seem to think about this signing. The Kings are in need of some ball handlers and creators, and while Schroeder isn't the perfect point guard, he's probably going to be their best facilitator. He also proved he can be more than capable of a defender in the playoffs. There were reports that they were the favorites to sign Russell Westbrook. Now that they've got Dennis Schroeder, I don't know if signing Russ will be the most useful use of their money. Moving on from a good signing to a baffling trade, where they send Jonas Valanciunas to the Nuggets for Dario Saric. The only reason why the Kings will do this trade that makes sense was because Saric is on an expiring contract and is only making $5 million this season, compared to Valanciunas, who still has 2 years left and will be making $10 million in both years. But the Kings are trying to compete, so that much of a downgrade doesn't make a lot of sense. They also signed Drew Eubanks to compete with Saric for the backup center spot. They lost Jake LaRavia to the Lakers, but they have a bunch of wings already, so it shouldn't be that big of a loss. They did re-sign Doug McDermott, however, which is a wing that is pretty similar to LaRavia. For a depth signing, I don't think it's bad. They're also rumored to be the favorites to land Kuminga. If they're able to get him, it'll improve their offseason, but I don't think they'd be winners either way. The next team up is the Los Angeles Lakers, and they're surprisingly winners. Their offseason got off to a very concerning start, but before we get into the free agency period, I want to talk about their draft. They didn't have their first-round pick this year, which would have been the 23rd pick, but the Pelicans own it from the Anthony Davis trade. They did have a second-rounder, which was originally the 45th pick, but they traded that and cash to the Timberwolves for the 36th pick, where they selected Adu Firo. Firo is a Jared Vanderbilt type of player that's an incredible defender on the perimeter, but his offense, especially his three-point shot, is a work in progress. Moving on to the free agency period, where it seemed like it took them ages to finally make a move that would really benefit them. On the first day of free agency, however, they signed Jake LaRavia to a 2-year deal worth $6 million annually. I have mixed opinions on this signing. I don't think it's a perfect signing, the one the Lakers needed, but it's not a bad deal. It's only 2 years, and he'll only be making 3% of their cap. 2 days later, they finally landed a center, by agreeing on a 2-year deal with DeAndre Ayton worth $8 million a season. I would have preferred the Lakers to get a defensive-minded love threat type of player that grabs a bunch of rebounds like Daniel Gafford or Nick Claxton, but Ayton on that cheap contract will do, I guess. There were a bunch of better-fitting centers on the market like Clint Capella, Brook Lopez, Miles Turner, who the Lakers wouldn't have been able to afford, so scrap that. But Luke Cornett would have been a perfect fit. They also signed Marcus Smart, who was bought out by the Wizards on a 2-year deal worth $5 million a season with a player option. Somehow the Lakers have snagged another decent player on a minimum. I don't know how they keep getting away with it. The Lakers needed some more perimeter defenders, and Marcus Smart is a former Defensive Player of the Year winner. He may not be as good as a defender as he was in Boston, but he was asked to do a lot in Memphis, and especially in Washington. But he shouldn't have a big role offensively in LA, and he should be focused on his defense. I would say the Lakers are winners by who they've signed, but the players they could have signed makes me want to call them losers, so I'll say they're directly in the middle. The next team up is the Dallas Mavericks, and they are winners. They had a very loud but quiet offseason at the same time, starting at the draft where they lucked out and got the first overall pick, where they selected a generational talent, Cooper Flag, and they signed undrafted free agent Ryan Nembhard, who was the younger brother of Indiana Pacer Andrew Nembhard. Cooper Flag has a lot of size, standing at 6'9", with a 7-foot wingspan. His defense is the standout, and something that should translate to the NBA on day one. His offense will probably take some time to fully translate, but he's in a perfect spot in Dallas, where he doesn't have to be relied on to create all the offense. Ryan Nembhard is a great shooter from beyond the arc and an incredible free-throw shooter. He's also at his best when he's facilitating the offense and getting his teammates involved. Their free agency was pretty quiet, player acquisition-wise. They did sign D'Angelo Russell to an incredibly undervalued deal. He signed a 2-year deal with just over $5.5 million annually. With Kyrie being out for a lot of the season, D'Angelo Russell will be starting for a lot of the season, and getting a guy that is capable of being really good for $5.5 million is great value. The only player they've lost is Spencer Dinwiddie, who signed with the Hornets, but with the rise of Brandon Williams late last year, it's not a real big loss. They were active when it came to contract extensions. They signed Kyrie to a 3-year extension worth $119 million, which is just under $40 million a season. I'm not a huge fan of the signing. Kyrie is 33 and coming off an ACL tear. It will be a monumental achievement if he could return the same or even close to the same player he was before he got hurt. Then it could be worth it, but unfortunately I doubt it. They also extended Daniel Gafford to a 3-year extension worth around $19 million a season. If it weren't for Derek Lively, I would be a big fan of this extension, but it is a little bit of an overpay for a backup center. But I'm a really big fan of Gafford, and I'm happy the Mavs extended him. They also extended Dante Exum on a 1-year vet minimum deal, which is a good signing. He was great in his first year in Dallas, but faced an injury-riddled season last year. I like him as a depth signing. He can cover the point guard, shooting guard, and small forward position if injuries do occur, which is pretty likely with their injury history. Moving on to the Denver Nuggets, and they're, if not, the biggest one of the biggest winners of the offseason. They didn't have a first-round pick or a second-rounder, so we'll move onto their free agency period. It started about an hour into free agency, where they made their first move, where they sent Michael Porter Jr. on a 2032 first-round pick to the Brooklyn Nets for Cam Johnson. I love this trade for the Nuggets for the short-term future. Johnson is an exceptional off-the-ball shooter who doesn't need the ball in his hands to be the most effective, and is a pretty decent defender. He'll be the perfect fit next to Jokic, with a pretty similar player to Michael Porter Jr., just a better defender and more consistent, but isn't as good at rebounding. But when you have Jokic on your team, I don't think they'll miss Michael Porter Jr.'s rebounding. This trade cannot look so good in the future by the time that pick comes around, especially if the Nuggets are unable to win another championship. But you have to make the most of what you've got when you got the second or third best player on your team. About half an hour later, they signed Bruce Brown to a 1-year vet minimum deal. This is an absolute steal of a signing. Bruce Brown played a huge part of their championship run in 2023. He gives the Nuggets some much-needed perimeter defense, and he's a great three-point shooter from the corner, and a great off-ball player, including his cutting ability. A day later, they made another trade where they finally got a decent backup center to give Nikola Jokic a proper rest without completely blowing a lead when Jokic is off the court. The last move they've made so far is signing Tim Hardaway Jr. to a veteran minimum. Another great signing for the Nuggets. Hardaway Jr. isn't the most consistent shooter, but I truly believe next to Jokic, Hardaway Jr. can have his best and most efficient season in a while. Russ is still a free agent, and he more than likely is not going to be on their roster next season. But if they can somehow bring him back, it'll be close to a flawless offseason. They still have no backup point guard, unless you consider Bruce Brown a point guard, but I'd consider him more of a shooting guard, small forward. The next team up is the New Orleans Pelicans, and they are losers. The Pelicans are another team that doesn't have a direction. DeJounte Murray will be out for half of the season with an Achilles tear, which will put them down a ball handler and a defender for half of the season. Their offseason started at the draft, where they took Jeremiah Fears with the 7th pick, and they traded up from the 23rd to the 13th pick, while giving up an unprotected first rounder in next year's draft, which could very well end up being the first overall pick, or even a top 5 pick to the Hawks, where they took Derek Queen. They also had the 40th pick, where they took Micah Peavy. Fears is elite at driving to the rim and initiating contacts, but he isn't the best at finishing through it. He gets to the free throw line with ease and is a decent shooter, but he can improve from both the charity stripe and beyond the arc. He's also great at finding the open man when driving to the paint. Derek Queen is a risky pick with high upside, but can very well turn into a reach with players available. Derek Queen has good touch around the rim, nice footwork, and is a good passer for his position, but does struggle when it comes to his defense and his shooting from beyond the three-point line. Moving on to the moves they've made during free agency. The first one was where they traded CJ McCollum, Kelly Olynyk, and a future second round-up to the Wizards for Jordan Poole, Sadiq Bey, and the rights to Micah Peavy. I don't mind this trade for New Orleans. They get younger, and they also get a better player by swapping McCollum for Jordan Poole. But this does leave another hole at their backup center spot. Just after the free agency period started, they signed Kevon Looney to a 2-year deal worth $8 million a season. I don't mind this signing either. As a backup center, he doesn't have to be fantastic. He's a great rebounder and can be good on the defensive end, which is what the Pelicans need. He does struggle to stay healthy, and with the Pelicans' history of injuries, it really could turn sour if he continues with the injuries. Last signing they've made so far is signing Jaden Springer to a 1-year minimum deal. I like this signing also. They don't have a ton of good defenders on the perimeter, and that's what Springer brings to the table. But his struggle offensively is why he's been bouncing from team to team as of late. They extended Herb Jones to a 3-year deal worth around $22.5 million, which is a lot of money, but for the defense he provides for a team that struggles on that end, I think it can be worth it. Not to mention, he's not a perfect shooter, but he's been improving every year. They did lose the main asset they got back from the Brandon Ingram trade, Bruce Brown, which will hurt considering they didn't get much draft capital. But the Pelicans have a little more issues than losing Bruce Brown. If it weren't for them trading their first-round pick next year, I'd say they were winners. But they did, and they won't be competitive in the West next year, so they're losers for me. The next team up is the Houston Rockets, and they are huge winners. Their offseason started the morning of Game 7 of the NBA Finals, where they traded Jalen Green, Dillon Brooks, the 10th pick, and 5 second-rounders for Kevin Durant. Obviously for now, the Houston Rockets are the winners of that trade. Their offense struggled mightily in the playoffs especially, so they added Kevin Durant, who even at 36 years old, averaged 26 points on 52% from the field and 43% from three last season. Durant will help this Rockets team so much, not just his scoring, but it should open up the Rockets as a whole. They made their big-time acquisition, so they very well could have become complacent, but they kept their foot on the gas during the free agency period and snatched Dorian Finney-Smith away from the Lakers by signing him to a 4-year deal worth around $13 million a season. This is another good move. The Rockets didn't have many 3-and-D players last season, so they'll have one of the best now. About an hour later, they signed Clint Capella to a 3-year deal worth around $6 million. It's not a needed signing, but it does give the Rockets insurance if Sengun or Steven Adams gets injured, and they can also be used as a trade piece at the deadline. But I don't see Capella getting much playing time in Houston. There's 2 more minor signings they made that I'll quickly go over. J.D. Davison from the Celtics. I think he fits in well with the Rockets' identity of their elite defense. And Josh Okogie is one of the better defenders on the perimeter. I don't know how teams are meant to score when the Rockets will have a lockdown defender on the court at all times. If you thought the Rockets were aggressive when it came to them adding players, wait till you see who they re-signed. Aaron Holiday, Jayshawn Tate, and Jeff Green all signed extensions that won't be taking up any cap space. I like these signings. All 3 of them are veterans that you need in a locker room. They extended Fred VanVleet to a 2-year deal worth $50 million, which will average out to $25 million a season, with a player option for the 2nd year. I think it's a little bit of an overpay, but it's better than the $45 million he was going to make. And Fred VanVleet is one of their only good shooters from beyond the 3-point line, and they are very shallow at the point guard position. Steven Adams also signed a 3-year, $39 million extension. Last year, especially in the playoffs, Adams proved to be one of the better backup centers, and he was a must-extend player for the Rockets. The last player they extended was Jabari Smith Jr., who signed a 5-year, $122 million extension, which will see him make an average of $24.4 million a season. He may be a little bit of an overpay for now, but with his potential in a couple of years, with his two-way ability of being a great defender and a good shooting game, he can definitely live up to the contract. Losing Cam Whitmore for nothing does hurt, but there wasn't a significant amount of playing time for him. Moving on to the San Antonio Spurs and their winners. Their offseason started at the draft, where they got extremely lucky, landing a second overall pick, where they took Dylan Harper. They also had the 14th pick, where they selected Carter Bryant. Harper is an elite-level shot maker who can play on or off the ball, and he's a good playmaker too. He's drawn comps from James Harden and Cade Cunningham, two elite-level guards in this league. Bryant isn't as good on the offensive end, but his defense is a standout, and in the Summer League he has shown a lot of flashes. Hopefully he stays as aggressive during the regular season. He can become a great three-point shooter in a couple of years, and has solid ball-handling ability. Moving on to their free agency period, they started off by signing backup center Luke Kornet to a 4-year deal for $41 million. I like the signing of Kornet, but I thought they definitely could have got him for cheaper, or someone of his caliber for a cheaper contract, but I'm happy Kornet has gotten paid. Him next to Wemby defensively will look extremely scary for opposing teams, plus it adds another log threat for De'Aaron Fox and Dylan Harper, and Kornet is an exceptional screener. They then traded for another big, where they sent out Malachi Branham, Blake Wesley, and a second-round pick to the Wizards for Kelly Olynyk. Yes, Olynyk is a preferred center, and they just signed one in free agency, but unlike Kornet, Olynyk can stretch the floor and is more than capable of being a full-time power forward. Branham and Wesley are still early on in their careers, but their games wouldn't have progressed any further if they would have stayed in San Antonio. A minor move they made was signing Jordan McLaughlin, who was part of the De'Aaron Fox trade, to a 1-year vet minimum deal. McLaughlin can pass and shoot, and is a player a lot of contenders can use off the bench, and for a minimum, this is great value. They also agreed on a huge 4-year, $229 million contract extension with De'Aaron Fox. I like the extension of De'Aaron Fox, but I'm definitely not a fan of how expensive he was. He will be making an average of $57 million a season. That's more than everyone in the league, other than Steph Curry, for this upcoming season. Other than the monster extension of Fox, I am a big fan of this offseason for the Spurs. The next team up is the Phoenix Suns, and they are slight losers. On the day of Game 7 of the NBA Finals, the Suns decided to part ways with superstar Kevin Durant by trading him with Jalen Green, Dylan Brooks, the 10th pick in the upcoming draft, and 5 future second-rounders. I'm a bigger fan of this trade than a lot of people were. Sure, they could have gotten more for Kevin Durant, but they also could have gotten a lot less for a guy that will soon turn 37. Jalen Green has a ton of potential. Ed could become close for 30-point-per-game scorer. Dylan Brooks is a great defender, which is something the Suns need, and he has turned himself into a decent shooter. This draft class is really deep, and even with the 10th pick, you could get someone really good. They decided to select Carmen Malawach with this pick. Malawach is projected to be a great rim protector and love threat that can potentially space the floor. He can hit the occasional free ball, but he won't be anything special straight away. He's also an extremely good free throw shooter with great form. The Suns traded for 2 more draft picks, One was for Rasheed Fleming, who was selected with the 31st pick, and the other was for the 31st pick, where they selected Kobe Bryant. Fleming has good length, standing at 6'9", with a 7'5" wingspan. He's a tremendous rebounder and rim protector, but his three-point shot is a real work in progress. Their last rookie, Kobe Bryant, is a specialist shooter, but doesn't really affect the game in any other ways. He's not a good defender, not a good playmaker, can't put the ball on the floor, and can't really finish at the rim. During the draft, they also traded for 23-year-old center Mark Williams from the Hornets. They gave up Micic, the 29th pick, which turned out to be Leo McNeely, and a 2029 first-round pick. Last season, the Suns were desperately missing a lob threat and rim-protecting center, and now they have one of the best young centers in the league. Unless this pick in 2029 turns out to be a top 10 pick, the Suns are big winners in this trade. They signed Jordan Goodwin and Jared Butler, both for 1-year minimum deals. I don't mind the signings, especially for so cheap. In limited minutes last year in Philly, Jared Butler looked very solid. In his pair 36, he averaged 17 points and 7 assists. Goodwin should help the Suns' weaker defense and rebounding. They also re-signed Devin Booker to a monster 2-year extension worth $145 million. He'll be making an average of $72.5 million over the next 2 years. He'll be making about 35% of their cap. That's insanity. They also re-signed Colin Gillespie to a 1-year minimum deal. There'll be lots of competition for that backup point guard spot, with him, Jared Butler, and Jordan Goodwin all deserving of it. They have lost a few players as well, one including the big talking point over the summer, Bradley Beal, getting bought out. They will still be paying him around $20 million over the next 5 years in dead cap. It's not an ideal situation, but it's better than playing him 30 or so minutes a night and him being dead weight. Tyus Jones was also another player they lost, but he is very replaceable. Moving on to the reigning champs, the OKC Thunder. I really can't say they are winners or losers. Coming off a championship, you don't have to make any moves, and that's exactly what they did. But they did extend most of their core, and for that reason, I'd say they are winners. At the draft, they had the 15th pick, where they selected Thomas Sorba, who unfortunately missed the entire season for torn ACL. They also had the 44th pick, where they selected guard Brooks Barnhizer. Those two were the only additions they made in the offseason. Before the free agency period started, they traded rookie Dylan Jones and a second-rounder to the Wizards for Colby Jones, who they then waived immediately after. This move gives them more cap space and a free roster spot to make more moves. The first player they extended was Jalen Williams, who signed a 3-year, $24 million extension. I'm a big fan of this signing. As a third-string center, he can't really get much better than Jay will. But for $8 million a season, it could get a little expensive. They then extended rookie AJ Mitchell to a 3-year, $9 million deal. Mitchell was extremely impressive as a rookie, making an impact on a team that just won the championship, and he got a much-deserved extension. Moving on to the big extensions, they re-signed Shai Gilgeous-Alexander to a 4-year, $285 million extension. This is a lot of money to throw at one player, but if there was anyone to throw that money at, it would be the guy coming off an MVP, the scoring champ, a championship, and finals MVP. Shea will be making 36% of their cap, and while he does deserve to get paid a whole lot, spending 36% of your cap on one player just isn't smart. Another one of their stars that was extended was Jalen Williams, who signed a 5-year, $287 million extension. I do like Jalen Williams and his game, but I don't think he's quite worth an average of $57 million just yet. He is coming off a fantastic year where he was a first-time All-Star, made an All-NBA team, All-Defensive team, and won a championship, but he has struggled to stay consistent. And the last player extended this offseason was Chet Holmgren, who signed a 5-year rookie max extension worth up to $250 million. Just like Jalen Williams, I think this was a bit of an overpay for what he is right now, but I have no doubt Chet will live up to this contract in the back end of the deal. Moving on to the Minnesota Timberwolves, and they are losers. Just like the Thunder, Wolves didn't do too much outside of the draft and re-signing some of their guys, but the only difference is the Thunder are coming off a title. Starting at the draft, where Minnesota had the 17th pick, where they selected forward Joan Behringer. They also traded for the 45th pick, where they took big man Rocco Zikarsky. Joan Behringer has a ton of potential on the defensive end as a rim protector, but can also step out onto the perimeter and guard guards and forwards. And he's also a strong rebounder, but his offensive game is limited. Their second rounder, Zikarsky, has a similar game to Behringer. He's also a very strong defender and rebounder, while being great in the post on the offensive end. They didn't make any signings, so I'll get straight into their extensions. The first one is Julius Randle, who signed a 3-year, $100 billion extension. I wasn't a big fan of the cat trade before the season started, and halfway through the regular season, I was really questioning the trade. But boy, did Randle prove me wrong in the playoffs in all aspects. He's usually an inconsistent, inefficient scorer, in the playoffs especially, but last year he was consistently scoring the ball. His playmaking, something that's usually not a strong suit of his, was also on display. His defense also improved drastically. $33 million is a ton of money for Randle, but for someone with that many strong suits, I'm not totally against it. They also extended Naz Reid, who signed a 5-year, $125 million extension. This one I'm not a fan of. Reid is way too inconsistent to be paying $25 million a season to. If he signed for 12 or 15 million, I would have liked it, but 25 is a ton of money for someone coming off your bench. They also signed Joe Ingles back to a 1-year vet minimum. Not much to say about it. Last year, they were one of the most expensive teams, so they lost Nickeil Alexander-Walker for nothing, which does hurt, but hopefully Terrence Shannon Jr. takes a leap and takes over Nas' spot. The next team up is the Portland Trail Blazers, and they are winners to an extent. The offseason started at the draft, where they traded down to take Chinese big man Hansen Yang with the 16th pick. Yang is a Sabonis type of player. Not athletic, not a good defender, but has a bigger body to hold his own in the paint. But he does have conditioning problems. But he also has an insanely good passing game for a big man, and has great touch around the rim. They also signed Caleb Love, who was an undrafted free agent. Love is a solid scorer. He's a streaky shooter, but does most of his scoring when he drives to the rim. He does struggle with turnovers, but that will go away with experience, and he also won't be relied on nearly as much in the NBA. The first move they made was finally trading away Anthony Simons after years of trade rumors for Drew Holiday in a straight swap. I'm a big fan of this trade for the Blazers. Drew is a very good veteran that impacts winning on so many levels and should bring that winning culture way more than Anthony Simons did, and other veterans that they either did have or do have, like DeAndre Ayton and Jeremy Grant. There definitely are a lot of positives, like their defense, with Drew, Chumani Kamara, and Donovan Clingan all being on the court together. Not to mention guys like Shaedon Sharpe and Danny Avdia, who aren't scrubs on the defensive side either. But it does take away minutes and touches from Scoot Henderson, who was meant to have a breakout season with Simons gone, but that probably won't happen now. They also signed future Hall of Famer and team legend Damian Lillard, who unfortunately missed the entire season with an Achilles tear. But getting someone of Dane's caliber on $14 million a season is a massive steal. Who knows how he'll be once he returns, and they very well could have overpaid him, even though he's already getting paid $20 million by the Bucks. The last signing they made was signing Blake Wesley to a 1-year minimum deal. I'm a huge fan of this signing. It's a low risk, high reward. Wesley is a good ball handler and can create his own shot from time to time. He's also athletic and can finish at the rim at a great level. His on-ball defense is also a strong point, but he does have to work on his shooting from beyond the arc, his playmaking, and his defense off the ball. It also wouldn't hurt to work on his consistency. If the Blazers were a contending team, they would no doubt be winners, but because they're still continuing their rebuild, the offseason doesn't make a lot of sense. The next team up is the Golden State Warriors, and they are massive looters. They have one of, if not, the oldest rosters in the league, so they're in win now mode, but clearly aren't close to being a competitive team, and have done nothing this offseason so far. To be fair to them, the whole Jonathan Kuminga debacle has completely ruined any chance they've had of making moves. Their offseason started at the draft, where they did not have their own first-round pick, but they did have 2 second-rounders, where they took Alex Tui with the 52nd pick and Will Richard with the 56th pick. Tui is a good shooter and defender, and can fill up the stat sheet when given the chance. Will Richard is a great defender and is athletic, but doesn't have a great three-point shot right now, but he definitely can turn into a solid shooter. The Warriors have not made a single signing this offseason, but they have reportedly agreed on verbal agreements with Al Horford, DeAnthony Melton, and Gary Payton, but are waiting for the Kuminga situation to finish up to announce them. If that is true, then that's huge, but there were better big men on the market that they missed out on. They haven't lost anyone of note other than Kevon Looney, but he was in and out of the rotation for the Warriors anyway, so it isn't that big of a loss, but they will miss his height and his rebounding ability. As of right now, while the Kuminga situation is going on, Looney is the only player they haven't brought back. That's gonna end this video. If you enjoyed, make sure to like the video and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on the next video.